Hi there, I'm Margaret Prouse, and we're just recording a little video to give you some ideas for a different type of Christmas entree. Christmas is going to be different on a lot of levels this year for a lot of people, depending on how big your family is and where they live. You might be celebrating by yourself this year, and if you're not, it's always fun to try something different anyway. More people are trying plant-based meals more often. And what we have to show you today is a plant-based entree for Christmas or any special occasion. It's a stuffed squash with a sauce on it. Okay, for this dish, we're going to start with either 3 or 4 little squash, and I've just cut them in half and scooped the seeds out. You can use acorn squash, or these are buttercup squash. I wouldn't recommend butternut because the cavity in them is a little smaller and you need lots of space for the stuffing in these. So I've washed them and cut them in half and scooped the seeds out. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of oil in the bottom of this 9x13 pan so they won't stick, and brush it around. There. And we'll put these in the pan. You could consider these equivalent to, like each half squash, you could consider it equivalent to your turkey and stuffing. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to put a little more water in here. I need just about ½ inch of water at the bottom, just so they won't dry out too much. Now, different squashes have different levels of moisture in them. Some of them are quite wet, but I find buttercup are a little drier, so it's kind of important to have the liquid there. I have pierced these squash a little bit, the skins of them, with a fork, just so they won't break up too much, and I'm going to put them in the oven. It'll take maybe 30 minutes or so for them to soften. It'll depend on the size of the squash and how dense they are. So I'll put them in the oven now. There. Now we're going to stuff this squash with a mixture that contains tofu. And the tofu has been pressed. And I've already diced it up, but I want to show you how to press it. Tofu contains quite a bit of water, and the firmer you get, the less water it contains. But if you get regular tofu, you need to press it for this recipe to get some of the moisture squeezed out of it. And the way to do that is to take the block of tofu and put it on something that's got a little depth to it, so the liquid will come out of it and have a place to go, and then put a weight on the top of it. So I'm just putting a plate on it and a jar of mustard. You can use a can of beans, or you can use a brick, whatever you have, and leave it that way. If you're going to leave it for very long, put it in the refrigerator. If you're doing it for just like 20 minutes, you can do it at room temperature. So I've already done that with this before I used it, and now I'm going to set this aside and we'll marinate the tofu. Tofu is really simple. It is simply 3 tablespoons of soy sauce mixed with 3 tablespoons of dry sherry. Oh, that's not going to come out very quickly, is it? Let's do this. One, 2, 3. Do the same with the sherry. And if you prefer not to use sherry, you could probably use apple juice or something like that. It certainly wouldn't add the same flavor, but it would just add a little flavor to the tofu, which is quite bland by itself. Sometimes people think they don't like it, and if they don't like it, it may be because they just don't like what it's been mixed with, because tofu itself doesn't have a lot of flavor. 2, 3. out of the way. Whisk it a little bit. And put the tofu in there. Okay, we'll give it a stir. And it doesn't take long for the flavors to absorb in this because it is a somewhat porous food. And as I said before, tofu will take on flavors of most anything you marinate it in. So it can be sweet. Sometimes people use it in things like cheesecakes. It can be savory in dishes like the one we're preparing today. I'm going to set this aside now and let it absorb the flavors, and we'll move on to the next step. The next step in this recipe is to start sauteing the vegetables that will go into the stuffing for the squash. So I'm going to put a little bit of canola oil in the pot. Need to use a big pan for this because you're going to add a lot of ingredients to it. So don't start out with the shallow frying pan. This is a Dutch oven. It's 4 liters and this works really well for that amount. Now you could of course cut the recipe in half if you have a smaller group that you're serving. Or the other thing you can do is freeze some of it. If you make a full batch, you can freeze it and use them later. So for starters, I have 3 cups of chopped onion, just regular cooking onion, and 3 stalks of celery, which are finely chopped. And it seems like a lot of chopping. If you like to, if you preferred, you could do them in a food processor. It would take less time. Just make sure that you don't process them till they're mushy. Make sure there's still chunks in it. I like chopping things. I find it quite meditative. I don't know, there's a lot of anxiety and stress at this time of year, and doing something repetitive and rhythmic, I find is useful in combating that anxiety. It's kind of like walking. You're doing something that kind of occupies your mind, but yet your mind is free to wander at the same time. So I think chopping is one of the best ways to combat anxiety. Just mental health tip there. Now, move that over there, and I'll turn this on. What we want to do is cook this mixture just until the onions start to get translucent, so that we'll know they're cooked. So it's going to take a few minutes. You can see that they're just white. You just see white and green now, but when they cook a little more, the onions will become translucent. So, our 10 minutes is up. The mushrooms are cooked. And now it's time to add the tofu and the breadcrumbs. Now this is the tofu that we're marinating. It's absorbed most of the marinade, and if there's any left, oh, there is a little in the bottom, and that just goes into the mixture. And I'm also going to add breadcrumbs. Now the crumbs have been, after they were cut up, well, they're not crumbs, they're cubes really. After it's cut up, they are toasted in the oven for a while. And you might say, why would you toast them and then add them to a liquidy mixture? And it's for the flavor, because when you toast the bread, it gets a special flavor that you won't get if you just put in the bread by itself as a fresh, if you just put in fresh bread by itself. So I'm stirring those in together. And we're just going to turn the heat up higher and cook this for another 5 minutes. Our 5 minutes is up, so this looks a lot like stuffing now, doesn't it? There. Now I'm going to move it off the heat, and I'm just going to taste it for seasoning, because this is the point where we can add a little salt and pepper if that's what it needs. It's nice and salty from the soy sauce, but I'm going to add a little pepper. It occurs to me now that what I would really like to add is a little hot sauce, but I don't have any hot sauce right now. But if I were doing this again, that's what I would add. So I've stirred in a little pepper. And now I've got some toasted pecans that were chopped. So I just lay them in a single layer on a baking sheet. Put it in the oven at 350 and it took about 10 minutes. You have to watch them quite closely because nuts are high in fat, and once they start to brown, they can burn really quickly. But I found 10 minutes was about right, and another clue that they're almost ready is you start to smell that nice toasty smell. So take them out of the oven then and chop them up. So this is about a cup of pecans, and if you wanted to, if you preferred to use other nuts, you could do that as well. So I'm going to sprinkle these in here now, and we're going to add about a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. So I'm going to squeeze this half lemon. It's got a lot of seeds in it. Wow. Some of them don't have many, but some of them have a ton of seeds. Set that aside. Let's see if I can scoop out some of the seeds. A tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. Just sprinkle that on. Stir it all around. There's a lot of protein in this stuffing because the tofu supplies protein and the nuts do as well. So you're gonna, in this meal, you'll have fruits and vegetables, lots of them, from the squash, the celery, the onions, and you'll have protein from the tofu and the nuts, and you just have a few other flavorings in there. So it's a nice balanced meal altogether. So give this a stir, and then when the squash is baked and soft, we're going to fill it with this. Set that aside. See, the squash is, it looks about the same as it did when we put it in the oven, but the flesh is nice and soft now, and we're going to turn them over and we're going to fill them with the stuffing that we prepared. Turn these over first, and then we will use this ice cream scoop to fill the cavities with the stuffing. See how nice and bright the color is now? Isn't it beautiful? This is such a colorful dish. Now I found that this ice cream scoop is a perfect thing for moving the stuffing into the squash. I'm going to make a light and tangy orange sauce to serve with our stuffed squash. And as you can see, I've got the ingredients laid out. I find it's really helpful to do what the chefs call a mise en place. Get everything measured and organized before you start cooking. So I have the orange juice here. I've got 2 cups of orange juice. I've got some canola oil, and I've got some fresh ginger. Actually, it's frozen ginger that I'm going to grate in a minute. A little bit of thyme, a little bit of soy sauce, and some cornstarch that I'm going to mix with water. So for the ginger, grated ginger works really well if you use frozen ginger. I just buy a little piece of it in the produce section and keep it in a plastic bag, a resealable plastic bag in the freezer. And then to grate it, just use a little grater. It makes a lot of noise. Now, it's such a simple sauce. You just basically put everything together in a saucepan and cook it. So I've got 2 cups of orange juice, or 500 milliliters. And I'm going to add the ginger. There's a little bit of oil added, just to give it kind of a silky mouthfeel. And it calls for a pinch of thyme, sort of an indefinite amount, but we'll say that's a pinch. A teaspoon of soy sauce. If you prefer to use light soy sauce that has less salt in it, you can do that. And now it's thickened with cornstarch and water. Whisk it around a little bit. And we'll just take it over to the stove and cook it until it thickens up. And this is our sauce. It's thickening up now because it's come to a nice boil. I've turned the heat way down low on it. And that is all there is to it. Now we've got our tangy orange sauce to serve with this stuffed squash. The stuffed squash onto the serving plate. There's a nice contrast there between the dark plate and the bright orange of the squash. This is the tangy orange sauce with ginger in it. And we'll serve a little bit extra sauce at the table so that people can add more if they'd like to.